The thunderous rain crashed down upon the sprawling Texas plains as Mary Keller clutched her infant daughter to her chest, her soaked cotton dress clinging to her trembling frame like a second skin. It was 1876, and Mary was running for her life, her breath coming in ragged gasps as mud splashed up her torn stockings and threatened to pull the worn boots from her feet with each desperate step. "Hush now, Ellie, hush," she whispered to the wailing bundle in her arms, trying to shield the 3-month-old from the merciless downpour with nothing but her own body. The baby's cries were nearly drowned out by the roaring storm, but each tiny sob tore at Mary's heart. "We'll find shelter soon, I promise." Lightning split the sky, momentarily illuminating the desolate landscape ahead, rolling hills, sparse trees, and not a building in sight. Mary's chest tightened with despair as she stumbled forward, her long auburn hair plastered against her face, obscuring her vision. She had been fleeing for hours, ever since her husband's brother had shown up at their homestead with a bottle of whiskey and murder in his eyes. The sound of hoofbeats broke through the cacophony of rain, and Mary's heart leapt into her throat. Had Arthur found her? Had he tracked her through this punishing storm? With her last reserves of energy, she veered toward a cluster of scrub brush, hoping desperately to hide herself and Ellie before whoever was approaching could spot them. But it was too late. The rider had seen her. Mary clutched Ellie tighter as a tall figure on horseback emerged from the curtain of rain, approaching steadily. "Madam," the deep voice carried over the storm. "Madam, are you all right?" Mary froze, uncertain whether to run or beg for mercy. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the mud. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a long duster and wide-brimmed hat that shed water like a roof. "You shouldn't be out in this storm," he said, coming closer with his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. In the flash of lightning, Mary saw a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes as blue as a summer sky. He couldn't have been more than 30, with the confident stance of a man who knew the harshness of the frontier. "Please," Mary choked out, "I need to keep going." The baby wailed louder, and the stranger's gaze fell to the bundle in her arms. Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and stepped forward, draping it over both Mary and her child. "My name's Sam Zachary," he said, his voice gentle but firm enough to carry over the storm. "Most folks call me Sam. I've got a cabin about a mile from here. You and your little one will catch your death if you stay in this rain." The warmth of his coat enveloped Mary immediately. It smelled of leather, horses, and wood smoke, unfamiliar but somehow comforting. Ellie's cries softened as the rain no longer pelted her tiny face. "I can't," Mary began, but Sam interrupted her. "Whatever you're running from, madam, it won't help if you and your baby fall ill out here. Let me take you somewhere dry. After that, you're free to go wherever you please." Mary hesitated, searching the stranger's face for any sign of deceit or danger, but found only honest concern. With Arthur potentially pursuing them and the storm showing no signs of abating, she had little choice. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling the coat tighter around Ellie. Sam nodded and led her to his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding that stood patiently in the rain. "Can you ride?" he asked, preparing to help her up. "Yes," Mary replied. Growing up on her father's ranch in Colorado, she'd been riding since before she could walk. Sam lifted her effortlessly onto the saddle, then handed her the baby before mounting behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a protective barrier that made Mary stiffen initially, then gradually relax as they set off through the storm. "I don't even know your name," Sam said, his breath warm against her ear as they rode. "Mary," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Mary Keller, and this is Ellie." Sam guided the horse expertly through the darkening landscape, following a path invisible to Mary's eyes. "Pleased to meet you both, though I wish it were under better circumstances." As they rode, the rain began to ease slightly, and Mary caught glimpses of the surrounding countryside, rugged and beautiful, dotted with stands of pine and oak. The tension in her shoulders gradually eased, though her mind remained alert for any sign of pursuit. "There it is," Sam said eventually, pointing to a small cabin nestled against a hillside. Smoke curled from the chimney, a beacon of warmth and safety in the gathering dusk. Sam's cabin was modest but sturdy, built of thick logs with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. A corral stood to one side, currently empty save for a few chickens seeking shelter under the overhang of a lean-to barn. He dismounted first, then reached up to take Ellie while Mary slid down from the saddle. The moment her feet touched the ground, her legs nearly buckled beneath her, exhaustion finally catching up. Sam's free arm shot out to steady her. "Easy now," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Let's get you both inside." The interior of the cabin was blessedly warm, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. It was a single room with a bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. Everything was neat and orderly, reflecting its owner's methodical nature. "Sit by the fire," Sam instructed, guiding Mary to the rocking chair. He handed Ellie back to her, then moved to hang his dripping hat on a peg by the door. "I'll make some coffee and heat up some stew." "You look like you haven't eaten in days." Mary hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma of simmering stew reached her nostrils. Her stomach clenched painfully, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since fleeing the homestead early that morning. "Thank you," she said, her voice small in the cozy space. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Sam waved away her words as he moved about the kitchen, pouring water into a coffee pot and placing it on the stove. "No need for that. Couldn't leave a woman and baby out in weather like this." He paused, then added carefully, "Though I reckon there's a story behind why you were out there in the first place." Mary tensed, clutching Ellie closer. The baby had finally fallen asleep, her tiny face peaceful for the first time in hours. Sam noticed her reaction and raised his hands. "You don't owe me any explanations, Miss Keller. Your business is your own." "Mrs." Mary corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it as a shadow crossed Sam's face. "Is your husband looking for you?" he asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. Mary swallowed hard, debating how much to reveal to this stranger who had saved them from the storm. "My husband is dead," she said finally, her voice breaking on the last word. "Killed yesterday by his own brother." Sam's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Keller. The man who killed him, Arthur, he's the one I'm running from," Mary continued, finding that once she'd started, the words came tumbling out. "He always resented Thomas for inheriting the family land. Said Thomas didn't deserve it because he'd left to seek his fortune in the gold fields before returning. When Thomas refused to sell his share to Arthur, things got ugly." Sam placed a steaming mug of coffee on the small table beside her. "And now he's after you and the little one." Mary nodded, accepting the mug gratefully. "Ellie is the sole heir now. If something were to happen to us both, the property would pass to Arthur as the next of kin." She took a sip of the strong, black coffee, letting it warm her from the inside. He was drunk when he came to the house. Thomas tried to reason with him, but Arthur shot him point blank. I grabbed Ellie and ran out the back while Arthur was still standing over Thomas's body. "Did you have anywhere particular in mind to go?" Sam asked, stirring the pot of stew. Mary shook her head. "I just knew I had to get as far away as possible. I've been traveling east since dawn, staying off the main roads." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "You've come about 20 miles from Willow Creek, if that's where you started from." "You know the town?" Mary asked, surprised. "Passed through a few times," Sam replied. "Never stayed long, too many people for my liking." He ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a spoon and a chunk of bread. "Eat while it's hot. You need your strength." Mary balanced the bowl in her lap, careful not to disturb Ellie. The stew was simple venison, potatoes, and carrots, but it tasted like heaven after her long day of fear and flight. Sam settled into the other chair, watching her eat with satisfaction. "You're welcome to stay the night," he said. "The storm's not letting up anytime soon, and you and the little one need rest. I'll sleep by the fire and you can take the bed." Mary wanted to protest such generosity, but exhaustion weighed heavily on her limbs, and the thought of a real bed was too tempting to refuse. "Just for tonight," she agreed. "We'll be on our way tomorrow." Sam nodded, though his expression suggested he had reservations about her plan. "Where will you go?" It was the question Mary had been avoiding asking herself. She had no family left. Her parents had died years ago, and her only sister lived in Boston, too far to reach with limited funds and a baby in tow. I don't know, she admitted quietly. Somewhere Arthur won't think to look, maybe east to Dallas or south to Austin. Both long journeys with a young one, Sam observed, not unkindly. And Arthur sounds like a man who won't give up easily. Mary's eyes filled with tears that she stubbornly blinked away. I don't have much choice. I need to keep Ellie safe. Sam studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. I might have a suggestion, but we can talk about it tomorrow. For now, you should rest. After finishing her meal, Mary accepted Sam's offer of a clean shirt to sleep in. It hung like a tent on her slender frame, but it was dry and smelled of soap and sunshine. Sam discreetly turned his back while she changed behind a blanket he'd hung for privacy, then showed her to the bed. What about Ellie? Mary asked, reluctant to lay the baby directly on the bed. Sam disappeared into a small storage area and returned with a wooden crate. It's not fancy, but it should serve as a cradle for tonight, he said, lining it with a soft blanket and placing it beside the bed. My mother always said babies sleep best in something snug. Mary carefully laid Ellie in the makeshift cradle, and to her surprise, the infant settled immediately, her tiny fists relaxing as she slipped deeper into sleep. Your mother was wise, Mary murmured, touched by Sam's thoughtfulness. She was, Sam agreed, a hint of sadness in his voice. Get some rest, Mrs. Keller. You're safe here. As Mary slipped between the clean, if somewhat rough, sheets of Sam's bed, she realized it was the first time she'd felt safe since Thomas's murder. The sound of rain on the roof, once terrifying, now seemed almost soothing, a natural barrier between her and the dangers of the world outside. She watched as Sam arranged his bedroll near the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. Despite her exhaustion, questions swirled in her mind. Who was this man who had so readily opened his home to strangers? What was his story? And most importantly, could she truly trust him? But as sleep claimed her, Mary's last conscious thought was that for tonight, at least, she and Ellie were warm, dry, and protected, all because a kind cowboy had covered them with his coat in the midst of a storm. Morning arrived with gentle persistence, sunlight filtering through the single window of Sam's cabin. Mary woke disoriented, momentarily panicked until she remembered the events of the previous day. Ellie was still sleeping peacefully in her crate cradle, and the aroma of coffee and frying bacon filled the small space. Sam stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. He'd already been outside, judging by his damp boots and the fresh firewood stacked by the hearth. Good morning, Mary said softly, sitting up and running a hand through her tangled hair. Sam turned, a smile warming his features. Good morning. Hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of starting breakfast. Figured you could use a solid meal before you decide what's next. Mary slipped from the bed, still wearing Sam's oversized shirt. She felt vulnerable without her own clothes, but a quick glance showed them hanging near the fire, nearly dry. I appreciate it, she said, moving to check on Ellie. The baby stirred, her tiny face scrunching before her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the same deep brown as her father's had been. The thought sent a pang through Mary's heart. She looks like a good baby, Sam observed, sliding bacon onto a plate. She is, Mary agreed, lifting Ellie and cradling her close. Though she'll be hungry soon, I should feed her. Sam nodded, his expression respectful. Take your time. I'll step outside to check on my horse while you do that. His consideration touched Mary deeply. Thomas had been a good man, but like many husbands, he'd never quite understood the intimacy of a mother nursing her child. Sam's quiet respect for that moment spoke volumes about his character. While Sam was outside, Mary fed Ellie, then changed back into her own clothes, which were still slightly damp but wearable. By the time Sam returned, she was seated at the table with Ellie in her arms, ready to face whatever the day might bring. Breakfast was a simple but hearty affair: bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee. Sam ate with the efficient hunger of a man accustomed to physical labor, while Mary savored each bite, knowing it might be a while before she enjoyed another home-cooked meal. About what you mentioned last night, Mary began cautiously. You said you had a suggestion. Sam nodded, wiping his mouth with a cloth napkin. There's a widow woman about 15 miles east of here, Mrs. Elena Harper. She owns a small ranch and is always looking for help, especially from women who aren't afraid of hard work. A ranch, Mary echoed, her interest piqued. She'd grown up on one after all, and the skills her father had taught her remained ingrained. It's nothing grand, Sam clarified. Maybe 40 head of cattle, some horses, a decent garden plot. Mrs. Harper lost her husband in the war and her son to fever 2 winters back. She's managed on her own since then, hiring temporary help when needed, but she's mentioned wanting someone more permanent. And you think she might take in a woman with a baby? Mary asked, not daring to hope too much. Sam's blue eyes met her steadily. Mrs. Harper loves children, never had any of her own. I reckon she'd consider Ellie a blessing rather than a burden. Mary considered this possibility. A widow's ranch would be the last place Arthur would think to look for her, especially if it was well off the main roads, and working for room and board would solve her immediate need for shelter and income. How do you know Mrs. Harper? She asked, curious about the connection. A slight flush colored Sam's tanned cheeks. I do odd jobs for her when I'm not working my own place. Built her a new chicken coop last fall, helped with branding in the spring. She's a good woman, fair and kind-hearted. Mary nodded slowly. It sounds promising, but how would I get there? I can't walk 15 miles with Ellie. I'd take you, Sam said simply, as if it were the most natural solution in the world. It's only a few hours' ride and the weather's cleared. Mary studied him, searching for any hidden motive behind his continued generosity. She'd learned the hard way that men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Yet Sam's expression remained open and honest, his offer seemingly genuine. Why are you helping us? She asked finally. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Sam was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window. My sister was in a situation not unlike yours once, he said softly. Ran from a bad husband with her boy. Not everyone she met along the way was kind to her. He looked back at Mary, his eyes reflecting old pain. I couldn't help her then. I wasn't there, but I'm here now and you need help. The simple honesty of his explanation touched Mary deeply. What happened to your sister? She asked gently. She made it to California eventually, remarried a decent man who treats her and my nephew well. A small smile crossed his face. She writes every month, sends pictures of the boy. He's 10 now. You must miss them. Every day, Sam admitted, but knowing she's safe and happy, that's what matters. He cleared his throat, seeming uncomfortable with having revealed so much. So what do you think about Mrs. Harper's place? Worth a try? Mary looked down at Ellie, now contentedly sucking her tiny fist, then back at Sam. Yes, she decided. If you think she might take us in, I'd like to meet her. Sam's smile returned, brightening his entire face. Good. We can leave after you've had time to rest a bit more. No sense rushing out if you're still tired from yesterday. Mary was about to insist she was fine when a thought occurred to her. What about Arthur? If he's looking for me, he might come this way. Doubtful he'd find this place, Sam assured her. It's well off any established trail and I don't socialize much in town. But just to be safe, we can take the long way around to Mrs. Harper's, avoid the main roads entirely. The thought of Arthur searching for them sent a shiver down Mary's spine despite the cabin's warmth. Thomas's lifeless eyes haunted her the shock, and betrayal frozen on his face as his own brother stood over him, pistol still smoking in his hand. Mary. Sam's voice, gentle with concern, pulled her from the grim memory. Are you all right? She forced herself to nod. Just remembering, understanding filled his eyes. The fresh pain is always the hardest to bear, but it does get easier to carry with time. You sound like you speak from experience, Mary observed. Sam rose to clear the plates, his movements suddenly less fluid. I've buried my share of loved ones, parents, friends, comrades during the war. You fought? Mary asked, though she could have guessed as much from his disciplined bearing. Union cavalry, Sam replied shortly. But that was another life. His tone discouraged further questions, and Mary respected his reticence. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss, herself included. The next few hours passed in comfortable domestic routine. Sam showed Mary where to find clean diapers he'd fashioned from soft flour sacks. insisting she take them for Ellie. He repaired a loose hinge on the door while Mary washed the breakfast dishes, and they worked together in companionable silence, each finding unexpected comfort in the other's presence. By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. Sam had saddled his gelding and a smaller mare he kept for pack trips. "The mare's gentle," he assured Mary. "She'll carry you and Ellie safely." Mary had fashioned a sling for Ellie from one of Sam's clean shirts, securing the baby against her chest where she could nurse discreetly if needed during the journey. Sam helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist, then handed her his coat once more. "The sun's out, but there's still a chill in the air," he explained. "Best to keep the little one warm." They set out at an easy pace, Sam leading the way through dense woods and across shallow streams, deliberately avoiding open trails where they might be spotted. He was clearly familiar with every hill and hollow of the region, navigating with the confidence of a man who had spent years learning the land's secrets. As they rode, Mary found herself studying Sam's profile: the straight nose, the firm jaw shadowed with a day's growth of beard, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon for any sign of danger. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, but it was his quiet strength and inherent decency that truly drew her attention. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Sam glanced back at her. "Going on 5 years now. Came west after the war, worked as a ranch hand for a while, saved enough to buy my own piece of land." "It must get lonely," Mary observed, thinking of his isolated cabin. A slight smile curved his lips. "I've got good neighbors, even if they are miles away, and I prefer the quiet to town life." "Too many people, too much noise." "The war," Mary guessed softly. Sam nodded, his expression growing distant. "Makes a man appreciate silence after you've heard nothing but cannon fire and screaming for years." They rode on, crossing a wide meadow dotted with early summer wildflowers. Ellie woke and fussed briefly before settling back to sleep, lulled by the gentle motion of the horse and the warmth of her mother's body. "She's a good traveler," Sam commented, watching the baby with something like wonder in his eyes. "Most little ones would be crying their heads off by now." Mary smiled down at her daughter. "She's always been easy that way. Thomas used to say she had an old soul." The mention of her husband's name no longer brought immediate tears, just a dull ache that Mary suspected would never fully disappear. "How long were you married?" Sam asked, guiding his horse around a fallen tree. 3 years, Mary replied. "We met when he came through Colorado looking for investors in a mining venture. My father was interested, and Thomas stayed with us while they worked out the details." She smiled at the memory. "By the time the papers were signed, Thomas had proposed and I'd accepted." Love at first sight. There was no judgment in Sam's tone, just genuine curiosity. Mary considered the question. Not exactly, but there was something about him, an earnestness, a determination to build something lasting. "I admired that." She adjusted Ellie's sling as the baby stirred. "We were happy together. He was a good husband and would have been a wonderful father." Sam nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I'm sorry he was taken from you both so cruelly." "Me too," Mary said softly. "But I have to focus on Ellie now, on keeping her safe and giving her the life Thomas would have wanted for her." "A mother's strength is something to behold," Sam remarked, his voice warm with respect. "My own mother raised 4 children after my father died, worked from dawn till dusk to keep food on the table, and never complained once." "Where is she now?" Mary asked. "Passed on 8 years ago," Sam replied, a shadow crossing his features. "Lived long enough to see all of us grown at least." They continued their journey through the changing landscape, Sam occasionally pointing out interesting sights: a family of deer drinking from a creek, an eagle's nest high in a dead pine, ancient rock formations, with histories known only to the indigenous peoples who had once claimed this land. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Sam guided them up a gentle slope. "Mrs. Harper's place is just over this ridge," he said. "Nice little valley, protected from the worst of the winter winds with good water year-round." Mary felt a flutter of nervous anticipation in her stomach. What if Mrs. Harper didn't want their help after all? What if she took one look at Mary and Ellie and turned them away? As if reading her thoughts, Sam said reassuringly, "Mrs. Harper's got a big heart. Even if she doesn't need help at the moment, she won't turn away a mother and child in need." They crested the ridge, and Mary's breath caught at the view below. A small but well-maintained ranch spread across the valley floor, a whitewashed farmhouse with a covered porch, a red barn, several outbuildings, and neatly fenced pastures where cattle grazed contentedly. A stream wound through the property, and an orchard of fruit trees stood in full bloom behind the house. "It's beautiful," Mary whispered. Sam nodded, pride evident in his expression. "Mrs. Harper works hard to keep it that way, shall we?" He clicked his tongue, urging his horse forward down the slope. As they approached, a figure emerged from the barn, a woman in her late 50s or early 60s, sturdy and straight-backed, with gray hair pulled into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She shaded her eyes against the late afternoon sun, watching their approach with evident curiosity. "Samuel Zachary," she called when they were within earshot, her voice strong and clear. "Wasn't expecting you till next week." Her gaze shifted to Mary and the baby, and her expression softened visibly. Sam dismounted and helped Mary down from the mare before answering. "Mrs. Harper, I'd like you to meet Mrs. Mary Keller and her daughter, Ellie." The older woman's eyes were kind but shrewd as she assessed Mary. "Welcome to Harper Ranch," she said, extending a work-roughened hand. "Ellie Harper, but most folks call me Ellie." Mary blinked in surprise, looking down at her daughter. "My Ellie's full name is Ellie as well." Mrs. Harper's face broke into a delighted smile. "Is that so?" "Well, that's surely a good sign." She glanced at Sam. "I suspect there's a story behind this visit," Sam nodded. "There is, and Mrs. Keller will tell you if she chooses. But the short of it is that she needs a safe place to stay, and I remembered you mentioning you could use help around the ranch." Mrs. Harper studied Mary for a long moment, her gaze taking in the fading bruise on her cheek, a souvenir from when she'd fallen while fleeing the homestead, the protective way she held her child, and the mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. "Can you cook?" she asked abruptly. Caught off guard by the question, Mary nodded. "Yes, madam, my mother taught me well. Garden. Yes, madam, and I can preserve too. Handle livestock. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Colorado," Mary replied with growing confidence. "I can ride, rope, and brand if needed, though it's been a few years." Mrs. Harper's eyebrows rose, clearly impressed. "And that little one, she got a good set of lungs on her." Mary couldn't help but smile. "When she needs something, the whole county knows it." The older woman nodded decisively. "Good, quiet babies worry me." She turned and gestured toward the house. "Come inside, both of you. Sun's getting low and I've got stew on the stove. We can talk terms over supper." Relief washed over Mary like a wave. She hadn't been turned away. There was hope for shelter, for work, for a new beginning far from Arthur's reach. Sam caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod before collecting the horse's reins. "I'll see to the animals," he said. "You go on with Mrs. Harper." The farmhouse was as neat inside as out, with braided rugs on the polished wood floors, curtains at the windows, and a collection of well-tended houseplants on every available surface. The furniture was old but well-made, and the walls were adorned with framed photographs and handcrafted quilts. "Have a seat," Mrs. Harper said, gesturing to the kitchen table as she moved to stir a pot bubbling on the stove. "You look done-in, child." Mary sank gratefully onto a chair, carefully adjusting Ellie in her arms. The baby was awake now, her dark eyes curiously taking in the new surroundings. "May I?" Mrs. Harper asked, approaching with her hands outstretched. Mary hesitated only briefly before passing Ellie to the older woman. Mrs. Harper cradled the infant with practiced ease, cooing softly as she examined her tiny features. "She's a beauty," she declared. "Strong, too, I can tell by her grip." Indeed, Ellie had latched onto Mrs. Harper's finger with surprising strength. "How old is she?" 3 months, Mary replied, watching the interaction closely. "Perfect age," Mrs. Harper said cryptically, returning the baby to Mary's arms. "Old enough to have some personality, but young enough to still spend most of her time sleeping." She moved back to the stove, adding dumplings to the stew. "Now, Samuel mentioned you need a safe place. I won't pry into your troubles unless you want to share them, but I should know if there's danger that might follow you here." Mary swallowed hard, glancing toward the door where Sam would enter any moment. "My husband was murdered by his brother 2 days ago," she said quietly. "I fled with Ellie before he could harm us as well." Mrs. Harper's hands stilled for a moment, her back to Mary. "Land dispute," she guessed shrewdly. "Yes, madam." The older woman nodded as if this confirmed something. "Men and their precious acres. Never understood why they'd kill over dirt when there's so much of it in this country." She turned to face Mary, her expression resolute. "Well, Ellie Keller, you and your mother are welcome here for as long as you need. This ranch is remote enough that strangers stand out, and I've got good relations with my neighbors. Anyone comes asking questions, they won't find answers easily." Tears of gratitude sprang to Mary's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. I don't know how to—" "Ellie," the older woman interrupted. "Call me Ellie. Can't have 2 Mrs. Harpers on the property, it'll confuse the chickens." Her eyes twinkled with humor despite the seriousness of the situation. The door opened and Sam entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Animals are settled," he reported. "Gave them water and a bit of grain." "Good," Mrs. Harper Ellie said, nodding approvingly. "Now wash up, both of you. Supper's nearly ready." The meal was delicious rich beef stew with fluffy dumplings, fresh baked bread, and apple cobbler for dessert. As they ate, Ellie Harper outlined what she expected from Mary in exchange for room and board. "I need help with the cooking, cleaning, garden, and chickens," she explained. "The cattle mostly look after themselves this time of year, but come roundup time, an extra pair of hands would be useful. I've got 2 men who ride for me, brothers named Caleb and Joshua Turner. They live in the bunkhouse and handle most of the heavy work, but they're gone more often than not these days, helping neighboring ranches with their spring branding." "That seems more than fair," Mary agreed readily. The arrangement would give her and baby Ellie shelter while allowing her to earn her keep through honest work, exactly what she had hoped for. "As for your little one," Ellie continued, her expression softening, "she's welcome wherever you are. I've got an old cradle in the attic that my Henry made when we thought we might be blessed with children. Never got to use it myself, but it's sturdy and clean." Mary's heart swelled with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough." "No need for thanks," Ellie said firmly. "This ranch is too big for one old woman. Having a young mother and baby around will bring life back to these walls." She glanced at Sam, who had been quietly observing the conversation. "And I expect you'll be checking in on them regular like Samuel." A flush crept up Sam's neck. "If Mrs. Keller doesn't object, I'd like to make sure they're settling in all right." "I'd appreciate that," Mary said sincerely, meeting his gaze across the table. There was something steadying about Sam's presence, a reliability that made her feel safer than she had since Thomas's death. After supper, Ellie Harper showed Mary to a comfortable bedroom at the back of the house, with a window overlooking the orchard. The promised cradle had already been brought down and placed beside the bed, its wooden surface polished to a soft glow by years of careful maintenance. "This was to be our son's room," Ellie explained, a shadow of old grief passing across her features. "James was 23 when the fever took him. Smart as a whip, that boy. Was going to turn this place into the finest horse breeding operation in the territory." Mary touched the older woman's arm gently. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Ellie nodded, patting Mary's hand. "Life takes and gives, child, takes and gives." She moved to the dresser, opening a drawer to reveal neatly folded linens. "There's everything you need here. Bathrooms down the hall, we've got indoor plumbing, one of James's projects before he passed. Hot water if you pump the handle by the stove 10 minutes beforehand." The luxury of indoor plumbing after 2 days of hardship nearly brought Mary to tears again. "This is more than I could have hoped for," she said honestly. "Rest now," Ellie instructed. "Tomorrow's soon enough to start learning the routines around here." Mary nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was despite the few hours of sleep she'd gotten at Sam's cabin. The emotional toll of the past days had drained her completely. Before leaving, Ellie paused at the door. "Samuel will be staying in the bunkhouse tonight, heading back to his place in the morning. He's a good man, Mary, the best I know." With that cryptic comment, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone with her thoughts and her sleeping daughter, Mary moved to the window, gazing out at the twilight-shrouded orchard. The apple and peach trees were in full bloom, their blossoms glowing faintly in the gathering darkness like earthbound stars. For the first time since fleeing her home, Mary allowed herself to believe that she and Ellie might truly be safe. This remote ranch, with its kind-hearted owner and the protective presence of Sam Zachary, felt like a haven, a place where she could perhaps begin to heal from the trauma of Thomas's murder and build a new life for herself and her daughter. As she prepared for bed, Mary's thoughts returned to Sam. His unexpected kindness had quite literally saved their lives. If he hadn't found them in that storm, covered them with his coat and brought them to shelter. Mary shuddered, unwilling to contemplate what might have happened. There was something about him that inspired trust, a steadiness, an integrity that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a stove. And though Mary had sworn to herself that she would never again put her fate in a man's hands after what had happened with Thomas, she couldn't deny the comfort she felt knowing Sam was nearby. Sleep claimed her almost as soon as her head touched the pillow, and for the first time in days, Mary's dreams were peaceful, untainted by the horror of her husband's murder or the fear of what might become of her and Ellie. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Mary settled into life at Harper Ranch. True to her word, Ellie Harper was a fair and kind employer, patient as Mary learned the rhythms and routines of the ranch. The work was hard but satisfying, tending the vegetable garden, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, helping with meals, and keeping the house clean. Baby Ellie thrived in the peaceful environment, growing plumper and more alert with each passing day. She spent hours in her cradle on the porch while Mary worked in the garden or nestled in a sling against her mother's chest as Mary moved about the house. Ellie Harper doted on the infant, singing old lullabies and telling stories as if the baby could understand every word. The Turner brothers, Caleb and Joshua, returned from their work at neighboring ranches about a week after Mary's arrival. They were polite, hard-working men in their 30s who treated Mary with respectful distance and baby Ellie with gruff affection. They asked no questions about her past, accepting Ellie Harper's simple explanation that Mary was a young widow helping around the ranch in exchange for room and board. And then there was Sam. True to his word, he visited regularly, riding over from his own property at least once a week, usually on Sundays. He always brought something small for baby Ellie, a hand-carved wooden rattle, a tiny stuffed horse made from scraps of leather, a silver teething ring that had been his mother's. For Mary, he brought books borrowed from his modest library, correctly guessing that she enjoyed reading but had been forced to leave her own books behind. His visits quickly became the highlight of Mary's week. She found herself watching the trail that led to his property, her heart lifting when she spotted his tall figure approaching on horseback. They would sit on the porch after Sunday dinner, talking for hours while baby Ellie slept in Mary's arms or cooed contentedly in Sam's gentle hold. She learned that he had been a captain in the Union cavalry, had fought at Gettysburg and several other major battles, and still carried a bullet in his shoulder that occasionally troubled him in cold weather. He spoke little of the horrors he'd witnessed, but Mary sensed they haunted him still. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Colorado, of her parents' ranch, and the skills her father had taught her, of her dreams before life had taken such an unexpected turn. She spoke of Thomas, too, finding that the pain lessened slightly with each telling, transforming gradually from a sharp, stabbing grief to a duller ache of loss. As June turned to July, and the Texas summer heat settled over the land, Mary began to realize that her feelings for Sam were deepening beyond simple friendship or gratitude. She found herself noticing small details, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his large hands when he held baby Ellie, the rich timbre of his voice as he read aloud from one of the books he'd brought. But she fought against these feelings, reminding herself that her priority had to be her daughter's safety and future. Romance was a luxury she couldn't afford, a complication she didn't need. Besides, Sam had never indicated that he saw her as anything more than a friend in need of protection. One sweltering afternoon in mid-July, Mary was alone at the ranch house, Ellie Harper having gone into town for supplies with the Turner brothers. Baby Ellie was napping in her cradle on the porch, a mosquito net protecting her from the persistent insects that hummed in the heavy air. Mary was kneading bread dough, her forearms dusted with flour, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Thinking it was Ellie and the Turners returning early, she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch only to freeze in horror at the sight of the rider coming up the lane. It was Arthur Keller, Thomas's brother, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low over his face but his distinctive red beard immediately recognizable. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs as panic clawed at her throat. How had he found them? What should she do? Instinctively, she scooped up baby Ellie from her cradle and retreated into the house, her mind racing. She could run out the back, try to hide in the orchard, but Arthur would surely search the property. If only Sam were here or the Turner brothers. A desperate idea formed in her mind. Hurrying to Ellie Harper's bedroom, she laid baby Ellie on the bed and quickly changed into a pair of the older woman's clothes, a shapeless dress, and a bonnet that would hide her distinctive auburn hair. She pinched her cheeks to bring color to them and bit her lips to redden them, trying to alter her appearance as much as possible. Then she returned to the kitchen, settled baby Ellie in her high chair with a piece of bread to gum, and resumed kneading the dough with shaking hands, her back to the door. A heavy knock came moments later. Coming. Mary called, deliberately pitching her voice lower than normal and affecting a slight drawl that mimicked Ellie Harper's Texas accent. She opened the door partway, keeping her face partially shadowed by the bonnet. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, mentally praying that her disguise would fool Arthur, who had only met her a handful of times before her marriage to Thomas. Arthur removed his hat, revealing hair as red as his beard, now plastered to his skull with sweat. "Afternoon, madam. Sorry to trouble you. I'm looking for a young woman and her baby, my sister-in-law and niece. They've been missing for some weeks now, and I've been searching all over for them." Mary's knees felt like water, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. "Missing, you say? That's troubling indeed. How old is the child?" "Just a few months," Arthur replied, his eyes moving past her to scan what he could see of the interior. They landed on baby Ellie in her high chair, and Mary's heart nearly stopped. "Your little one?" Arthur asked, his gaze sharpening. "My granddaughter," Mary lied smoothly. "My daughter's in town with her husband. I'm watching the little angel while they're gone." Arthur studied her for a long moment, and Mary was certain he could hear the thundering of her heart. But after what seemed an eternity, he nodded and replaced his hat. "If you do happen to see a young woman with auburn hair and a baby girl, I'd be much obliged if you'd let the sheriff in Willow Creek know. Families worried sick about them." "Of course," Mary agreed, her voice remarkably steady despite her terror. "Though we don't get many strangers out this way. Mostly keep to ourselves." Arthur thanked her and turned to go, but then paused. "One more thing, madam. You wouldn't happen to know a man named Sam Zachary, would you? I heard in town he might have helped my sister-in-law." A chill ran down Mary's spine. "Zachary," she repeated, pretending to consider the name. "Can't say as I do. Most of the menfolk around here are named Turner or Wilson." Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded again. "Much obliged for your time, madam. Good day to you." Mary closed the door and sagged against it, her legs finally giving way as she slid to the floor. Baby Ellie, sensing her mother's distress, began to whimper, and Mary forced herself to stand on trembling legs to comfort her daughter. She had just bought them some time, but Arthur was clearly still searching, and worse, he somehow knew that Sam had helped them. How long before he returned with more questions? How long before he realized he had been speaking to Mary herself? She needed to warn Sam. But she couldn't leave the ranch. Arthur might still be nearby, watching from a distance. And she couldn't risk baby Ellie's safety by taking her through the summer heat to Sam's cabin, 15 miles away. For the next several hours, Mary moved through the house like a ghost, jumping at every sound, peering anxiously through the curtains for any sign of Arthur's return. When she finally heard hoofbeats in the late afternoon, she grabbed the rifle Ellie Harper kept above the kitchen door and positioned herself by the window, ready to defend her child if necessary. But it was Sam who appeared on the trail, riding at a leisurely pace, unaware of the danger. Mary flung open the door and ran to meet him, still clutching the rifle. "Mary," Sam dismounted quickly, alarm evident on his face as he took in her disheveled appearance and the weapon in her hands. "What's happened?" "Arthur was here," she gasped, scanning the surrounding landscape fearfully. "Earlier today, he's looking for us, Sam, and he asked about you by name." Sam's expression darkened. "Are you and Ellie all right? Did he recognize you?" "I don't think so. I disguised myself as best I could, pretended to be Ellie Harper." Mary's voice broke, but he saw baby Ellie. "I said she was my grandchild, and I think he believed me, but I'm not sure. And he knows about you, Sam. Someone in town must have told him you helped us." Sam placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Let's get inside. We need to think this through." Once inside, Mary explained everything that had happened while Sam listened intently, his blue eyes grave. Baby Ellie, oblivious to the tension, happily allowed Sam to hold her, tugging at his shirt buttons with curious fingers. "We need to leave," Mary concluded, wringing her hands. "Arthur will be back, I'm certain of it, and next time he might bring others, or catch Ellie Harper and the Turners unprepared. Rushing off without a plan is exactly what he'd expect," Sam countered gently. "We need to be smarter than that." He thought for a moment, bouncing baby Ellie lightly in his arms. "Does Arthur know what Ellie looks like?" Mary shook her head. "He never saw her before Thomas was killed. She was asleep in her cradle when he came to the house that night." "That's something, at least," Sam mused. "It's you he'd recognize, not the baby." A terrible idea began to form in Mary's mind, one that made her heart constrict painfully, but that might offer her daughter the best chance at safety. "Sam," she said slowly, if I drew Arthur away from here, baby Ellie could stay with Ellie Harper. He'd never know and she'd be safe." "Absolutely not," Sam said firmly, his expression hardening. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself, Mary. There has to be another way." "What other way is there?" Mary demanded, tears filling her eyes. "Arthur won't stop looking for us. He killed his own brother in cold blood. He won't hesitate to kill me, or anyone who stands in his way. At least this way, Ellie would have a chance at life." Sam stood, carefully transferring baby Ellie back to Mary's arms. "There's another option," he said quietly. "One I've been considering for some time, though I'd planned to approach it differently." Mary looked up at him questioningly, cradling her daughter close. "Marry me," Sam said simply. Mary stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "Marry me," Sam repeated, his voice steady though a flush had crept up his neck. "As my wife, you'd have my name, my protection. We could move farther west, maybe to New Mexico territory or Arizona. Arthur would have a much harder time finding Mary Zachary than Mary Keller." "Sam," Mary breathed, stunned by the proposal, "you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," he replied, kneeling before her so that they were eye to eye. "I know it's sudden, and I know your heart still belongs to Thomas. I'm not asking for your love, Mary, only the chance to protect you and Ellie, to give you both the security you deserve." Tears spilled down Mary's cheeks. "You would do that? Marry a woman in name only, take on another man's child, leave your home all to keep us safe?" Sam reached out to brush away her tears with a gentle thumb. "I would, in a heartbeat." He hesitated, then added softly, "Though I hope, in time, you might come to see me as more than just a protector." Mary gazed at him, this man who had literally stepped out of a storm to save her and her child, who had asked nothing in return for his kindness, who was now offering to bind his life to hers simply to keep them safe. "I already do," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Sam's eyes widened slightly, a spark of hope lighting their blue depths. "Mary, I care for you, Sam," she admitted, her cheeks warming. "More than I should, perhaps, more than I thought I could care for anyone after Thomas. But I never imagined you might feel anything for me beyond kindness or pity." "Pity," Sam echoed incredulously. "Mary, I've been falling in love with you since the moment I found you in that storm, holding your baby close and refusing to give up despite everything. Your courage, your strength, your gentleness, how could I not love you?" Fresh tears came, but these were tears of wonder rather than fear or sorrow. "I'm afraid," Mary confessed. "Afraid of caring too much, of losing someone else I love, afraid that Arthur will hurt anyone who stands with me." "Fear's natural," Sam said, taking her free hand in his. "But we can't let it rule us. I lost too many years to fear after the war, shutting myself away from the world. Then I met a woman and her baby in a rainstorm, and suddenly I wanted more than mere survival. I wanted a life, a real life, with a family of my own. Baby Ellie chose that moment to reach out and grab Sam's nose, causing both adults to laugh despite the gravity of the situation. The simple, joyful moment crystallized something in Mary's heart, a certainty that this man, this unexpected blessing in her life, was offering her not just safety but a chance at genuine happiness. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I'll marry you, Sam. Not just for protection, but because I believe we could build a good life together." The smile that broke across Sam's face was like sunrise after the longest night, full of promise and hope. He leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that Mary returned with growing confidence, her heart lighter than it had been in months. When they finally parted, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "We'll need to move quickly," he murmured. "Arthur could return at any time." Mary nodded, her mind already racing ahead to practical considerations. "What about Ellie Harper? I can't just abandon her after all she's done for us." "We'll tell her everything," Sam decided. "She deserves to know the truth, and I suspect she'll be our strongest ally." As if summoned by their discussion, they heard the sound of a wagon approaching, and moments later, Ellie Harper's voice called out a greeting. Mary and Sam exchanged a look of shared purpose before rising to meet her, baby Ellie cooing contentedly between them. Ellie Harper took the news of Arthur's visit and Sam's proposal with characteristic practicality. "About time you asked her, Samuel," she said, surprising them both. "Been watching you moon over each other for weeks now." To Mary's astonishment, the older woman had already suspected something of their situation. "Not many young widows flee with nothing but their babies and the clothes on their backs," she pointed out shrewdly. "And you've been looking over your shoulder since you arrived, child. I figured someone was after you, though I didn't pry." "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the whole truth," Mary began, but Ellie waved away her apology. "Everyone's entitled to their secrets. What matters now is keeping you and little Ellie safe." She fixed Sam with a stern look. "I assume you're planning to make this official before you leave," Sam nodded. "If you know a preacher who can be trusted to be discreet, we'd be grateful." Ellie's expression softened. "Pastor Wilson from the church in Hidden Springs owes me a favor. He can be here tomorrow, perform the ceremony privately." Mary felt a pang at the thought of such a hasty wedding, with no family present, no celebration to mark the occasion. It was nothing like the elaborate ceremony she'd had when marrying Thomas, with her proud father walking her down the aisle and her mother weeping tears of joy. But those had been different times, and she was a different woman now. This marriage would be built on mutual respect and shared purpose, on the foundation of trust that had grown between her and Sam over these past weeks. In many ways, it felt more meaningful than all the trappings of a traditional wedding. "Tomorrow, then," Mary agreed, reaching for Sam's hand. He entwined his fingers with hers, his touch a silent promise. The Turner brothers, when informed of the situation, immediately volunteered to stand guard throughout the night in case Arthur returned. They had grown protective of Mary and baby Ellie during their time at the ranch, and the thought that someone wished them harm clearly angered the brothers. That night, as Mary prepared for bed in what would be her final night in Ellie Harper's guest room, she found herself unexpectedly calm. Tomorrow she would become Mary Zachary, wife to a man she had known for less than 2 months, but trusted more deeply than she had ever trusted anyone except her parents. She looked down at baby Ellie, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, unaware of the momentous changes coming to their lives. "We're going to be all right," Mary whispered to her daughter. "Sam will keep us safe, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find happiness again." The wedding took place the following afternoon in Ellie Harper's parlor. Pastor Wilson, a kindly man in his 60s with snow-white hair and gentle eyes, asked no questions about the urgency of the ceremony, simply performing his duties with dignity and warmth. Mary wore a simple blue dress borrowed from Ellie Harper's closet, something old, as the older woman pointed out with a wink. For something new, Sam had somehow procured a silver locket in which Mary placed a tiny lock of baby Ellie's hair. Her borrowed item was a handkerchief of fine lace that had belonged to Ellie Harper's mother, and for something blue, she wore a ribbon in her hair that matched her dress. The Turner brothers stood as witnesses, scrubbed clean and dressed in their Sunday best, looking both uncomfortable and oddly touched by the proceedings. Baby Ellie, dressed in a new white gown Ellie Harper had secretly sewn for the occasion, gurgled happily in the older woman's arms throughout the brief ceremony. When Pastor Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Sam's kiss was tender but restrained, mindful of their audience. Yet Mary felt the promise in it of protection, yes, but also of affection that might, with time and trust, deepen into the kind of love songs were written about. After a celebratory meal prepared by Ellie Harper, it was time to depart. Sam had decided they would travel to Santa Fe in New Mexico territory, where he had a friend who owned a ranch and was always looking for experienced help. It was far enough from Texas that Arthur would be unlikely to follow, especially if they were careful to leave few traces of their passage. Saying goodbye to Ellie Harper was harder than Mary had anticipated. The older woman had become like a mother to her in their short time together, offering guidance, support, and unconditional acceptance when Mary needed it most. "You take good care of them, Samuel Zachary," Ellie instructed, her voice gruff with suppressed emotion as she embraced Sam. "Their precious cargo." "With my life," Sam promised solemnly. To Mary, Ellie Harper gave a small wooden box. "Wedding present," she explained. "Open it when you're settled in your new home." Mary hugged the older woman tightly. "Thank you for everything. I'll write when we're safe, I promise." "See that you do," Ellie replied, dabbing at her eyes with a corner of her apron. "And bring this little angel back to visit her namesake someday." Baby Ellie, as if understanding she was the topic of conversation, reached out from Mary's arms toward the older woman. Ellie Harper took the infant's tiny hand and pressed a kiss to it, whispering a blessing that made Mary's eyes fill with tears. They departed as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, riding in a small wagon Sam had purchased for the journey, with their few belongings, Mary and baby Ellie's clothes, Sam's tools and books, and provisions for the trip packed securely in the back. Sam's gelding and the gentle mare were hitched to the wagon, while a third horse, a sturdy pinto, was tied behind to serve as an extra mount if needed. Ellie Harper and the Turner brothers stood on the porch, waving until the wagon disappeared around a bend in the road. Mary looked back one last time at the ranch that had been their sanctuary, then resolutely faced forward, toward whatever future awaited them in New Mexico. The journey to Santa Fe would take several weeks, with careful planning to avoid towns where Arthur might have spread word of his search. Sam had mapped out a route that would take them through sparsely populated areas, with overnight stays at isolated farms where possible, or camping under the stars when necessary. Their first night on the trail, they made camp in a sheltered grove beside a small creek. Sam efficiently set up a simple canvas tent for Mary and baby Ellie, built a fire, and prepared a meal of beans, bacon, and coffee that tasted better than any fancy restaurant fare to Mary's hungry palate. As twilight deepened into night, with baby Ellie asleep in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a wooden box lined with blankets, Mary and Sam sat side by side before the fire, the reality of their new situation settling around them like the gathering darkness. "Are you all right?" Sam asked softly, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames as he studied her face. Mary considered the question honestly. "I'm adjusting," she replied. "It's strange to think that this morning I woke up as Mary Keller and tonight I'm Mary Zachary. Do you regret it?" Sam's voice was carefully neutral, but Mary could sense the vulnerability beneath the question. She turned to face him fully, reaching out to take his hand. "No," she said firmly. "I don't regret it at all. I'm grateful, Sam, not just for the protection your name offers us, but for the chance to build a life with someone I trust and respect." The tension in Sam's shoulders eased visibly. "I want you to know," he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand, "that I meant every word of my vows today. I'll honor and cherish you, Mary, and I'll be a father to Ellie in every way that matters." "I know you will," Mary murmured, blinking back sudden tears. "She's already so attached to you, the way her face lights up when you hold her. Sam smiled, a tender expression that transformed his rugged features. She's easy to love, like her mother. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address its full implications. Instead, Mary leaned her head against Sam's shoulder, taking comfort in his solid presence and the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "We should get some rest," Sam said eventually, though he made no move to dislodge her. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Mary nodded but didn't immediately rise. "Sam," she said hesitantly, "where will you sleep?" It was a practical question, but one loaded with meaning. They were legally married now, but their union had been one of necessity more than romance, despite the growing affection between them. Sam cleared his throat. "I'll sleep out here by the fire. You and Ellie take the tent." When Mary began to protest, he added gently, "We have time, Mary. There's no rush for anything else. I want you to feel completely comfortable with me before we take that step." The consideration in his words, the lack of presumption, despite his legal rights as her husband, reinforced Mary's growing certainty that she had made the right choice in trusting this man. "Thank you," she said simply, rising to her feet. "Good night, Sam." "Good night," he replied, his eyes following her as she moved toward the tent. "Sleep well, Mrs. Zachary." The name sent a pleasant shiver through Mary as she slipped into the tent and settled beside her sleeping daughter. Mrs. Zachary. It would take some getting used to, but she found she liked the sound of it, liked the protection it offered, yes, but also the connection it represented to the remarkable man now standing guard over their sleep. The journey to Santa Fe took nearly a month, following a winding route that kept them away from major settlements. They developed a comfortable routine, rising with the sun, traveling until mid-afternoon, making camp early enough to rest properly before the next day's journey. Sam proved to be an excellent travel companion patient when baby Ellie was fussy, resourceful when supplies ran low, and always vigilant for any sign of pursuit. As the days passed, the boundaries between them gradually softened. Sam began sleeping just outside the tent flap rather than by the fire, close enough that Mary could hear his steady breathing in the night. Sometimes their hands would brush as they worked together around the camp, sending a flutter of awareness through Mary that both thrilled and unnerved her. And increasingly, she found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. One evening, about 2 weeks into their journey, as they sat beside a small fire in the shadow of a mesa somewhere in western Texas, Mary finally gathered the courage to ask a question that had been on her mind for days. "Sam," she began, her voice soft so as not to wake baby Ellie, who was asleep in her lap, "why did you really marry me?" Sam looked up from the knife he was sharpening, his expression puzzled. "I told you to keep you and Ellie safe." "I know that was part of it," Mary acknowledged. "But you could have helped us leave the territory, found us somewhere safe to settle without tying yourself to us permanently." She met his gaze steadily. "Why marriage, Sam? Why not just assistance?" Sam set aside the knife and whetstone, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "I suppose there were many reasons," he said finally. "Practical ones. Yes, a married woman with a husband at her side raises fewer questions than a young widow traveling alone. And legal ones. As your husband, I can better protect your interests and Ellie's." He paused, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "But if I'm being completely honest, Mary, the main reason was entirely selfish. I wanted you in my life permanently. I wanted the right to call you and Ellie my family." The simple sincerity of his admission touched Mary deeply. "That doesn't sound selfish to me," she said softly, Sam's lips curved in a rueful smile. "Perhaps not, but I didn't want to pressure you to make you feel that my help came with expectations." His gaze dropped to baby Ellie, sleeping peacefully in Mary's arms. "Your first priority had to be her safety. I understood that." "And now," Mary asked, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs, "now that we're married, now that we're heading toward a new life together, what are your expectations, Sam?" Sam was silent for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "I expect to build a home for us," he said finally, his voice low and intense. "I expect to work hard to provide for you and Ellie, to keep you both safe and happy." I expect to watch Ellie grow, to teach her to ride and read and face the world with courage." His eyes lifted to Mary's. "And I hope, though I don't expect it as a right, that in time you might come to love me as I already love you." The declaration, so plainly stated yet so profound, took Mary's breath away. "Sam," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Oh, Sam." Carefully cradling baby Ellie in one arm, she reached out with her free hand to touch his face, her fingertips tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I think," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that I'm already more than halfway there." Sam caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "May I kiss you, Mary, properly this time without an audience?" Mary nodded, her heart in her throat as Sam moved closer, taking baby Ellie from her arms and gently laying the sleeping infant on the blanket beside them. Then he cupped Mary's face in his hands, his touch as light as a butterfly's wing, and lowered his mouth to hers. Their wedding kiss had been chaste, restrained by circumstance and propriety. This kiss was different tender at first, then deepening as Mary responded to him, her arms sliding around his neck to draw him closer. It was a kiss of discovery, of promise, of hunger long denied finally acknowledged. When they finally parted, both breathless, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that properly since the first time I saw you smile," he admitted. Mary laughed softly, feeling lighter than she had in months. "And here I thought you were just being a gentleman." "Oh, I was definitely trying to be a gentleman," Sam assured her, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. "It just wasn't always easy, especially when you'd look at me a certain way." "What way?" Mary asked, curious. "Like you are right now," Sam murmured, leaning in to kiss her again, more briefly this time. "Like maybe I'm more than just a convenient protector." "You've never been just anything to me, Samuel Zachary," Mary said softly. "From the moment you covered Ellie and me with your coat in that storm, you've been our guardian angel." Sam's expression grew serious. "I'm no angel, Mary. I've made my share of mistakes, done things in the war I'm not proud of. But I promise you this, I will never intentionally cause you pain, and I will do everything in my power to make you and Ellie happy." Mary believed him, with a certainty that went bone deep. This man, who had risked his own safety to protect a stranger and her child, who had married her to keep them safe from harm, would move heaven and earth to keep his promises. "I know," she said simply, and sealed her trust with another kiss. That night, for the first time, Sam slept inside the tent, his bedroll laid out beside Mary's. They did nothing more than hold each other, Sam's arm a comforting weight across Mary's waist, her head tucked beneath his chin. Yet it felt like a significant threshold had been crossed not just physically, but emotionally, as they acknowledged the deepening bond between them. As they continued their journey northwestward, the landscape changed dramatically, flat plains giving way to rugged hills, then to the majestic mountains of New Mexico territory. The air grew cooler and drier, the sky an impossible blue that seemed to stretch forever. And with each mile, Mary felt the weight of her past lighten, as if she were shedding the fear and grief she had carried since Thomas's death. In their place grew hope, tentative at first, then stronger hope for a future with this quiet, steadfast man who had risked everything to save her and her daughter. By the time they reached the outskirts of Santa Fe in mid-August, the awkwardness that had initially marked their relationship had given way to a comfortable intimacy. They moved around each other with the ease of longtime partners, anticipating each other's needs, communicating often with just a glance or a touch. And baby Ellie, now nearly 5 months old, had blossomed during the journey, growing plumper and more alert with each passing day. She had begun to babble enthusiastically, especially when Sam spoke to her, and her first real smile had been for him a fact that filled Mary with both joy and a touch of bittersweet regret that Thomas would never see his daughter grow. Sam's friend, Daniel Foster, owned a substantial ranch about 20 miles outside Santa Fe. When they arrived, dusty and travel-worn but hopeful, they were greeted with unexpected warmth by Daniel and his wife, Rebecca, who had received Sam's letter explaining their situation. "Any friend of Sam's is family to us," Rebecca declared, whisking Mary and baby Ellie into the comfortable ranch house while Daniel and Sam saw to the horses and wagon. And any enemy of Sam's will find no welcome in these parts, I can promise you that. The Fosters had prepared a small cabin on their property for the newlyweds, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and windows that looked out on the breathtaking vistas of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It was simple but clean, and most importantly, it was far from Texas and the reach of Arthur Keller. That first night in their new home, after baby Ellie had been fed and settled in the cradle Daniel had built as a wedding gift, Mary and Sam stood together on the small porch, watching the stars emerge in the velvet darkness of the New Mexican sky. Happy? Sam asked, his arm around Mary's waist, drawing her close against the evening chill. Mary nodded, leaning into his embrace. More than I thought possible a few months ago. She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. Thank you, Sam, for everything. Sam caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished during their journey. Thank you for trusting me with your life and Ellie's. I promise I'll never give you cause to regret it. I know, Mary whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. When they parted, Sam's eyes were dark with an emotion Mary had come to recognize over the past week's desire, carefully contained out of respect for her feelings, but growing more difficult for him to conceal. Sam, she said softly, her heart racing. I think it's time we truly became husband and wife, don't you? The sharp intake of his breath was the only sign of his surprise. Are you certain, Mary? There's no rush. She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. I'm certain. I want this. I want you. Sam's control, maintained so carefully throughout their acquaintance, finally broke. With a groan, he gathered her into his arms, his kiss fierce and hungry, communicating all the longing he had kept in check for so long. Mary responded with equal fervor, her body awakening to sensations long dormant. As Sam lifted her into his arms and carried her inside, closing the door behind them with his foot, she felt a surge of gratitude for this second chance at love and happiness. Later, lying in the shelter of Sam's arms, her head pillowed on his chest, Mary listened to the strong, steady beat of his heart and marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that stormy day when she had fled her home with Ellie clutched to her breast, terrified and alone, to this peaceful night in a cabin in New Mexico, secure in the love of a good man. Penny for your thoughts, Sam murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Mary smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest, just above his heart. I was thinking about rain, she said. About how something that seemed so terrible at the time being caught in that storm with Ellie turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to us. Sam's arms tightened around her. I thank God every day that I found you, he said quietly. Though I suspect it was the other way around you found me, I was just existing before you came into my life, Mary, not really living. And now? She asked, lifting her head to meet his gaze in the dim light filtering through the cabin's window. Now I have everything I never knew I wanted, Sam replied, his voice rough with emotion. A wife I adore, a daughter to cherish, and a future brighter than any I could have imagined. Mary laid her head back on his chest, contentment washing over her in warm waves. I love you, Samuel Zachary, she whispered, saying the words aloud for the first time, with all my heart. And I love you, Mary Zachary, Sam replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You and Ellie are my world now. Outside, the vast New Mexican sky spread above their small cabin, stars scattered like diamonds across the darkness. And inside, in the warmth of each other's arms, Mary and Sam found the peace they had both sought for so long, a peace born of trust, respect, and a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness in a rainstorm. The years that followed were good ones for the Zachary family. Sam proved himself an invaluable asset to Daniel Foster's ranch operation, eventually becoming foreman and overseeing the expansion of the property as Santa Fe grew and prospered. Mary, drawing on her childhood experiences on her father's ranch, took charge of the horse breeding program, developing a line of sturdy, intelligent mounts that became sought after throughout the territory. And Ellie, Thomas's daughter by birth, but Sam's in every way that mattered, thrived in the clear mountain air and wide open spaces of her New Mexican home. By her 5th birthday, she was riding her own pony and following Sam around the ranch like a shadow, absorbing his knowledge of horses, cattle, and the land with a quick intelligence that made both her parents proud. In the spring of 1881, when Ellie was 6, Mary gave birth to twins, a boy they named Thomas Samuel, in honor of both the fathers in Ellie's life, and a girl they called Elizabeth Eleanor, for Mary's mother and their dear friend Ellie Harper, who had remained a constant presence in their lives through regular correspondence and occasional visits. Arthur Keller never found them. They learned through Ellie Harper that he had continued his search for nearly a year before being killed in a saloon brawl in Dodge City, Kansas, leaving no one to contest Thomas's will, which had named baby Ellie as his sole heir. The property in Texas was eventually sold, the proceeds placed in trust for Ellie's education and future. On a warm summer evening in 1887, more than 10 years after that fateful rainy day, when Sam had first covered Mary and Ellie with his coat, the Zachary family gathered on the porch of their home, no longer the small cabin, but a spacious ranch house built by Sam's own hands, with help from friends and neighbors. Ellie, now 12, and blossoming into a beautiful young woman with her father's dark eyes and her mother's auburn hair, sat on the steps playing a game of cat's cradle with 7-year-old Elizabeth. Thomas, his father's miniature with the same blue eyes and serious expression, leaned against the porch rail, whittling a piece of wood under Sam's watchful guidance. Mary, sitting in the rocking chair Sam had made for her when she was expecting the twins, watched her family with a heart so full it sometimes felt it might burst with happiness. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting a golden glow over the ranch that had become their kingdom. Sam caught her watching and smiled that same warm smile that had first given her hope in the darkest moment of her life. He left Thomas to his whittling and came to sit on the arm of her rocking chair, his hand naturally finding hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "What are you thinking about, love?" he asked softly, bringing her hand to his lips in the way he still did after all these years. Mary smiled up at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I was thinking about blessings," she replied, "about how sometimes they come disguised as hardships." Sam nodded, understanding immediately. They rarely spoke of those early days anymore, of Thomas's murder, of Mary's desperate flight through the rain with Ellie in her arms, of the fear that had driven them across state lines to build a new life. But the memory of that time served as a constant reminder of how precious their current happiness was, how hard-won and therefore how deeply cherished. "If someone had told me that day, when I first saw you struggling through the downpour," Sam said thoughtfully, "that I was looking at my future wife and the mother of my children, I wouldn't have believed it possible." "And if someone had told me," Mary replied, squeezing his hand, "that the cowboy who covered us with his coat would become the center of my world, I would have thought them mad." She looked out at their children, Ellie showing her little sister a new pattern with the string, Thomas holding up his carving for his father's approval. "Yet here we are, Sam agreed, his voice rich with satisfaction. "And here we'll stay, God willing, to watch our grandchildren play on these same steps someday." Mary leaned her head against his side, savoring the solid warmth of him. "I'd like that," she murmured. The light was fading now, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. Soon they would call the children in for supper, listen to their prayers at bedtime, then retire to their own room where, even after all these years, they still found joy and comfort in each other's arms. But for now, Mary was content to sit with her husband in the gathering dusk, watching their children play, surrounded by the peace they had created together. From the darkest day of her life had come this abundance of light and love, a miracle born of courage, trust, and the simple kindness of a stranger who had stopped in a storm to cover a desperate woman and her baby with his coat. As twilight deepened into night, Mary silently thanked God for rainstorms and for the good men who still rode through them, ready to offer shelter to those in need. And most of all, she thanked him for second chances, for the opportunity to find love again when all hope seemed lost. and for the wisdom to recognize it when it stood before her, dripping wet and holding out his coat like an offering. Sam pressed a kiss to the top of her head, as if sensing her thoughts. "I love you, Mary Zachary," he murmured, the words as heartfelt now as the first time he had spoken them. "And I love you, Samuel Zachary," Mary replied, her voice soft but certain in the gathering darkness. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows. Around them, the ranch settled into night's embrace, horses nickering softly in the barn, cattle lowing in the distant pastures, the wind whispering secrets to the pine trees on the hillside. And within their circle of lamplight, the Zachary family continued their quiet evening ritual, secure in the knowledge that whatever storms might come, they would weather them together, just as they had that very first day, the end.